Hello everyone, and welcome to the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexie. Together, we'll watch, snack, and chat our way through books and films set in the ancient world. We bring our expertise as ancient historians to the table to dissect every detail. We hope you'll grab your favourite beverage and snacks and join us every week on this adventure. Before we start spilling the tea, a brief note on our content. The Reading Party podcast is created for adult audiences. The stories of the ancient world are full of violence and undisguised sexual content, and your hosts aren't afraid to curse up a storm. For those reasons, this podcast is not suitable for under 18s, and certain episodes may not be suitable for those living with trauma. This season, we're focusing on stories set in ancient Egypt, and we'll be bringing in guest hosts that are subject matter experts to help us really dig into the history of what we're reading and watching. With that in mind, let's get going. Lexie and I have our teas and are so ready to start spilling the tea on a ton of ancient stories. Hello everyone, welcome back to Reading Party with your amazing hosts. Yes, I called myself amazing, Megan and Lexie. We are finishing up with Desert God, which is the Wilbur Smith novel that we are currently reading. It's chronologically second in the series, but we're reading it
Book 5
because I got confused with the chronology.
It's very confusing.
It is all very confusing. And I have other questions. I have so many questions. But before that, I am drinking, let me see, green tea with mango.
Yum, yum, yum.
Very
well,
good.
I still have I just finished my green tea with lemon, but I had green tea with lemon.
Delicious. Absolutely delicious. We should jump into the synopsis.
Yeah, so let's see. We left off right after they were leaving Ur for Babylon.
Yes.
So let's pick up with arriving in Babylon. What happens, Megan?
Well, they get to Babylon, and that's all very exciting. We have a lovely description of the city. They meet King Nimrod, who was not a real person, but we're skimming past that for now. They meet King Nimrod. He agrees to give them all the boats that they want. In return, he gets a whole shit ton of silver. At some point, Taita gets a tour around the Temple of Ishtar. We have thoughts about that too. We will get to those momentarily. He has a tour around the Temple of Ishtar. He discovers that he is, in fact, half god because the goddess Inanna appears to him. They form a union but don't actually have sex. It's all very confusing. Turns out he's half god. She's full goddess. They're somehow related and apparently like a divinely ordained couple of some kind. She says she's known him for thousands of years and she'll see him again and then they'll be together. Questions about that too. And ultimately, Taita gives King Nimrod even more gold, even more silver to persuade him to, form his army and come and help everybody defeat the Hyksos, because this is the whole point of the book, is to defeat the Hyksos, right? So that the Egyptians can take back the rest of Egypt. Bear that in mind for the ending of this novel. After this, they travel northeast, south, or west. They travel west to the Levant. They find a gentleman called Naram Sin, who is a very minor character, but please remember that name because we will be coming back to it. And that happens, and then they have a minor skirmish with some Hyksos on the coast, and then they get in their boats and they travel off to Crete. The Cretan ambassador, by the way, is a very nice gentleman. He and Taita form a lovely friendship, and he is also having a sexual relationship with the Cretan maid, the Minoan maid of the Egyptian princesses. We get to Crete. Oh no, first of all, they meet some sea pirates who are apparently the sea peoples. We'll get to that later as well. But Taita presses them into service to the Egyptian crown because their captain is a former Egyptian officer. So he goes off, Natal, not sure, goes off and goes to rouse up all of the sea pirates to help them also defeat the Hyksos, because that is the whole point of the book, defeating the Hyksos. Fearless heroes arrive at Crete, and the princesses are married to the High King
Supreme Minos.
There we go. The Supreme Minos, who sounds quite terrifying. He's very, very tall with this giant bull mask thing. We knew about the bull mask. We don't actually find out anything else about him. His mother is also there. And what happens is everyone is kind of ushered into this very large building. They have to get on their faces prostrate. And there's a lot of unintelligible Minoan talking. And then the ambassador tells Taita that now the princesses are married and he never gets to see them again. Taita is understandably a little distressed by this, given he's raised both girls from infanthood. But there is nothing to be done. The girls get removed and taken into the harem or wherever it is they're going to go. So that's all very sad. And the rest of the book kind of progresses. There's a couple of adventures on Crete. A servant is killed by a giant auroch, which is a huge bull-like creature. And there is another minor skirmish with Hyksos, which turns out to be an ambush, but Taita wins anyway. And then on their way back to Crete, they come in contact with all of these animals fleeing in the opposite direction. And the whole reason they're returning to Crete, by the way, is because Inanna has appeared to Taita in a dream and said that the princesses are in grave mortal danger. You must go to them. So he goes with all speed, with all of these animals kind of rushing in the other direction. And then there's a massive tidal wave that somehow doesn't sink the ship. And they get to Crete to find that pretty much everything has been destroyed by said tidal wave. And I've kind of skimmed over the whole Kronos thing. The volcano on Crete is assumed to be the manifestation of Kronos's like divineness. So when he's angry, the volcano erupts, and when he's not angry, it doesn't erupt. And in order to not have an angry god, one must perform sacrifices. The exact nature of sacrifices aren't really found out until right at the very end, when you discover that it is the wives of the Supreme Minos who are sacrificed, who are all of these princesses from around the Mediterranean, around the Aegean. They just kind of get carted off into this giant underground cavern and sacrificed to the god, which seems to mean being gored by a bull. So that's exciting. We go through all of that, and the princesses are, of course, saved by Taita and the two military officers. We have Hui and Zakar, who have fallen in love with the princesses, and it is a reciprocated love. They've actually been having affairs for most of the book. So they get saved, and then Taita kills the Supreme Minos, and they escape. And it's very wonderful and magical. Well, instead of going back to Egypt, the princesses decide that no, they're going to go elsewhere with their gentleman friends, because if they go back to Egypt, they'll just be forced into marriage to some other mad king. And, fair enough, fair play to them. I don't think I'd have gone back to Egypt either. So Taita says, okay, I understand. I love you. Goodbye. And the book kind of ends there. And you'll remember I've said a couple of times the whole point of the book is to defeat the Hyksos. Yes, there are a couple of skirmishes, but the Hyksos are still there and still undefeated. And honestly, the ending of the book, it just felt like a chapter ending. I was reading on my iPad, and I kept kind of scrolling through the end matter, trying to find the rest of the book. I thought maybe I had skipped a chapter or my finger had slipped. So no, the book just ends. So my primary question, having completed this entire book, is who is the desert god? And why is the book named after him? Because there are several gods that come into play here. We've got Kronos, who is a volcano god, or at least in this book is a volcano god. We have Horus, who's, Taita's personal emblem and patron and all that kind of thing. And we have Inanna Ishtar, who is demonstrably not a goddess of the desert. Yet the entire damn book is called Desert God. I'm confused. Am I missing something?
No. But
No,
also,
good.
I would just say it seems like it's just a catchy title to follow the rest of the series, only because the first book is River God, and there's not really an explanation of who the River God is. I mean, we sort of have the fact that Lustrous is connected to Hapi, but she's like a life-giving, and yeah, she kind of is the one who gives birth to the Nile, but still, it's not that clear. So I don't think too much into the title of the book that much. I wouldn't, at least.
No, I'm probably overthinking it.
Or maybe it's just a reference to the fact that he needs to go out and wander in the desert to meet Inanna. Which
he doesn't, though. He meets her in the palace.
But why does... Yeah, fine. Well, their adventures, like in his head, right?
So he has to cross the desert in order to get to the place where he meets Inanna. I suppose so.
Right. I mean, that's the loosest. But also, I mean, I just want to start and be like, look, being the most supernatural part of the whole book, which luckily I'm very happy that was kind of the only one. The rest was sort of more just fantasy, not as much as like the quest in terms of the myths and the magics. So it was nice to have that toned down. But why the hell do we think he used her Sumerian name and did just call her Ishtar?
I don't know, except that it's an older name. So if he's going for this sense of she's an ancient deity, using the oldest name, what makes sense. I don't understand to begin with why she's there. It doesn't track, and it seems like she's being inserted into Lostrus' role. This is the relationship that Taita wanted when Lostrus was alive. But all of the other books, he still obsessively thinks about Lostrus. Even if she's not a physically present character, he mentions her so much and he talks about her so much. She may as well be. This book, she's mentioned maybe a handful of times, and then we have fucking Ishtar coming in. And I love Ishtar. Don't get me wrong. She's like my favorite deity of all time. But it's such a bizarre insertion. And yes, I know that they're in Mesopotamia. But how has she always known him? And if she's always known him, and then he apologizes, he apologizes when they do their weird union thing. He apologizes for having lost his virginity to a mortal girl. And she's like, oh, it doesn't count. Because apparently Inanna is a virgin, by the way, according to this book. So he apologizes for having lost his virginity to a slave girl before he was castrated. And she said, oh, it's okay, it doesn't count. But he doesn't apologize for being madly in love with Lostrus, who is, in every other book, the singular love of his life. And yeah, it made my head hurt.
I think she's a plot insertion because I think he wanted to get us from point A to point B to explain why Taita has this incredible, why he's like the Einstein of the time, right? Where if you go, okay, well, he's part immortal, part god because he's the son of a god or whatever. I mean, I feel like that's backtracking later in the 5th book, right, in the series. But I guess that would be a more plausible answer as to why he lived to be a 116-year-old magus with magic powers in the previous book or 2 with Warlock, where he's not as old, but he's still a magus. So if I'm putting it together, again, just like in the first half of this book that we covered, I'm going to harp a lot on the lore because I'm like, look, it's fine that it's not super historically accurate. We've given up long ago. And now I'm looking at this purely as a fan of just the historical fiction genre, but also I want a good narrative. You know, if Lord of the Rings were this shoddily written, I'd have the same complaint, but it's,
you need internal consistency.
Yes, like this is the most inconsistent because what you have is he's a magus and then he went and he found these magic powers. It's not really explained, but other than just he sort of has it. And then now in book 5, suddenly you go way back in time to try to, it just writes like he's trying to sort of cover his missteps and is like, oh, maybe the quest went a little too crazy. Now I should go back in time and sort of explain maybe how we got there. But then the lore's all wrong. So I'm like, it doesn't really explain anything. It just makes me more confused. You know, it honestly smacks of like he wanted to have these nods to mythology and to the magics without going as far as the quest did. Because like Megan mentioned, Naram Sin, it's a famous name. If you want to go into the mythology of it, there's a famous myth, the Curse of Akkad, when Naram Sin was king of the Akkadian Empire, like he got his city cursed and all this. But like the Naram Sin we see in this book is not the mythological one.
It's more than that though. Naram Sin isn't just a mythological figure. He's an historically attested king. Like he made the fucking Akkadian Empire. He's a huge historical figure. And it's so bizarre to me to just have a character with the name Naram Sin, given that all of the other Babylonian names are appalling. He's either taken stuff from the Bible or he's taken divine names and just kind of put them onto kings. To have Naram Sin just as a provincial liaison, provincial ruler, at a time when Mesopotamia didn't even control the Levant, and also to call him a Sumerian, which I know I covered this last time. It's not Sumerian. Naram Sin isn't a Sumerian name. It's an Akkadian name. And he's an Akkadian ruler. He was an Akkadian ruler. And it's so frustrating that he's done so little research into one of the major physical locations of his book. It's really annoying. And I know that I try and say, and I said this in the episode, or I will say it. When are we airing the episode with Rose?
Whenever we want.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know I said it in the first season. I don't get frustrated, or you should try not to get frustrated with inconsistent or inaccuracies. Just look at what it's doing. The problem is what he's trying to do is create this immersive world, but it's just so poorly done. And again, it's stuff that isn't going to necessarily mean a lot to people who aren't familiar with Mesopotamia, but it's really basic knowledge that even just a quick Wikipedia search is going to show you. Maybe use different names, maybe. Yeah, I got very frustrated.
I can imagine. But also, I mean, it's interesting because I think the through line for all of these books is that he may be a casual history lover. He may just like to use it as his playground because he feels that, it's easier to sort of disconnect and not have to use so many real things. I don't know what the deal was when he wrote it, what his deal is, whatever. But it's just the through line is his strengths are in his description. So he likes to describe lush settings and happenings. So he's a very good descriptive writer. And it seems like plot is interesting, but characters, it seems like he has a good character and he just wants to find something to do with it. And he's good at describing what is happening or where they're going. So the historical part really does not seem like a strength. And you know what? If he doesn't claim to be I'm going to put in the research to make it a perfectly wonderful, accurate or somewhat accurate historical something, that's fine. But again...
But don't call the book series The Egyptians.
Right, or don't say it's the historical series, call it the mythological series, or do something. So that has struck me where it just seems like the premise of the marketing of the thing and what it's trying to go for on some higher level does not match with his strengths, which is interesting, fine, but it's really misleading. I mean, there's so many other historical inaccuracies. I mean, again, we're in Mesopotamia. Doesn't he still describe Babylon as being surrounded by a forest of trees?
Yes, he does. And
didn't he make some reference to the Hanging Gardens, which we have no evidence for?
Yeah, so
being there?
He talks about the Hanging Gardens being in Babylon, and I know that this is a really common misconception. There were gardens, probably the ones that are called now the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were actually probably in Nineveh. We have some documentation about a king making beautiful gardens for his wife, who was from a more mountainous region, and he wanted her to feel at home, so he made beautiful gardens for her. Again, Google will tell you this in about 15 minutes. You really don't have to go that far. And yeah, so we've got the Hanging Gardens. We've got a giant tower, which is clearly the Tower of Babel. It's unfinished because King Marduk was trying to lure the goddess Ishtar down to be his wife. I think we covered that last week. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to talk about the Ishtar temple.
Please.
Which I wasn't terribly surprised, honestly, to read this because it's one of those things that just will not die. Herodotus has a lot to answer for. So the temple to Ishtar is described as being full of women. Well, full. There are women in there, and the king has apparently decreed that all women must serve time at the temple essentially as temple prostitutes, right? Because Ishtar is the goddess of sex, love, and war. So, of course, the best way to worship her is to just have a whole bunch of sex. And there's this understanding that worship of the goddess Ishtar involved forced prostitution of the women of the city. There is no evidence, even a little bit, for any kind of prostitution happening at any temple. And prostitution is actually much more closely associated with taverns, which makes a little bit of sense if you think about it. But because we have this kind of weird story from Herodotus' histories, talking about the women of Babylon being required to work as sex workers in the temple to whatever man wishes to have sex with them. That's the predominant understanding that we get of women in Babylon and of worship to the goddess Ishtar. So the temple description is interesting. They talk about a bunch of temple reliefs and some of the war reliefs they're talking about are kind of reminiscent of the Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs. If you've seen any of the lion hunts or the war scenes, they're mostly in the British Museum. It kind of felt like that was what he was drawing on. But then he goes on to describe a lot of like erotic reliefs, which are very much ahistorical. We have some erotic imagery from Babylon, well, from the Old Babylonian period, which is not this time period, but it's close enough. You know what, we're going to go with it. We've got some erotic reliefs from there, but they're mostly from domestic contexts, and they do not involve deities. They're human people, and they're usually human people with a beer, having some fun. And they're pretty explicit, pretty graphic, but there's just two people at a time. It's not like this massive orgy that's being described here. So that whole thing was interesting. And then when we get to Ishtar, before we get there, the relief scene, the erotic relief scene is described as being like presided over by Ishtar flying above everyone with shining white wings, which is super weird. You don't get Ishtar with wings. The Burney relief, the Queen of the Night plaque that I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with, is an image of a Mesopotamian female deity with wings. She's got the horned crown. There are lions next to her feet, and she's got like talons for feet. There is a lot of debate about what that actually shows. We don't know if it's a Ereshkigal. We don't know if it's Inanna or Ishtar. We don't know if it's some kind of female demon. There's a decent possibility that actually it's a fake because it has no good excavation history. But to my knowledge, that's one of the only places where you see Ishtar maybe with wings. Like having shining white wings isn't part of Ishtar's imagery at all. Like you've got a rosette and a star and lions, maybe, if you want to go that way. Wings just don't really come into it. But then when we get Inanna actually appearing to him, and she strips off, she's described as having no body hair. Like very explicitly, no body hair and no pubic hair. And we've talked many times about Wilbur Smith's fascination with female nudity and his interesting views on young women and the fact that Taita cared for Lostris as a baby and a child and then fell madly in love with her. And this whole like prepubescent physicality of women it makes me very uncomfortable. And having Inanna with no pubic hair was bizarre. It was bizarre that it was pointed out so explicitly. And for someone coming from an Assyriological background, it was just generally bizarre because we have a whole set of love poetry, like erotic love poetry about Inanna talking about her pubic hair. Like, it's a thing, people. It's absolutely a thing that was celebrated by at least some people writing Mesopotamian erotic poetry. So that was very odd. And he's just telling on himself, in all honesty. And my final thing about the Inanna Ishtar thing is that Inanna uses the name Inanna because it's like her oldest name, her first name. But her parents have Greek names. Her parents are Artemis and Hyperion. And she explains the whole Artemis as a perpetual virgin's thing because Hyperion apparently just restored her virginity once Inanna was born. But if you're going with, we're using Inanna because it's the oldest name, why are we using classical Greek names for her parents? Why are we not using Sumerian names, which are the oldest divine names we have on record? It's wildly inconsistent. It's deeply frustrating. And frankly, it just tells me he did no research. He chose a bunch of mythology that he thought would work well together, and he just kind of threw it all at a wall and saw what connections he could draw.
It's like a mosh pit, a book version of a mosh pit. No, yeah, it's very upsetting. I mean, I think what's also upsetting is, he's trying to set up the Greek mythology for some... I mean, I know why, but he's doing it in a way where I don't think it pertains to, like, it doesn't matter. It's your Egyptian series. Now, unless you're going to take the next book to Greece, which, if I remember, he does actually have Taita go to, like, Sparta for some odd reason. But I can't remember, to be sure, because I haven't read this book since, like, 2017 or whatever. But unless you're shifting it to be a Greco-Egyptian series, there's no reason to bring in these details are not pertinent. I mean, okay, the Kronos thing, if you have him traveling to Crete, obviously I'm not an Assyriologist, so I don't really have skin in this game. So I just kind of go, I don't think that's right, but Megan will tell me I don't think that's right. That's my default. But by the time we get to Crete, I'm like, look, man, this is the shit I do know because I did start to learn about this in school for sure. I mean, I'm not a, Minoan specialist, but still, anyone with classical training, you even probably got it as starting out as a classicist. There were just so many things wrong. I mean, using of the volcano, I guess, if we want to sort of talk about what happens with ancient peoples, we thought that, they had divine answers for things they couldn't explain. Fine. It's just odd that you make it Kronos. I mean, God, I read this so fast because I just wanted it to be over, but I'm pretty sure he mentioned like Zeus in it or something. Because I think he was trying to. He was talking to like the ambassador to Crete and he was telling him about the pantheon of the gods and the mythology. And so I'm like, okay, so you're bringing in the classical gods, but then the overarching gods that are present are actually the Titans, but they don't really care to make the distinction between them and how the Titans and the gods are two very different pantheons. Like they are, I'm sorry. And then I just found it odd that, again, no research was done because if you were going to really do your research, all the time periods in Greek history, the Minoans were the only ones that followed a matriarchy. Like you have the very explicit statues of the snake goddess. She's a very famous piece of art. You always talk about how Cycladic art is very feminine because they valued women and the mother. And so to bring in this whole super hyper masculine, the Titans and Zeus, I'm just like, that doesn't track. Now, maybe he was trying to go back and be like, well, if we have the supreme Minos or whatever, and his mother playing a very big role, maybe that's his way of trying to insert the fact that women played a big role in Minoan culture. But the fact that the title for the character even is the supreme Minos or whatever, and like describing his treatment of the wives and the women and how he didn't really give a good explanation beyond he would marry them, but marry a lot of women. So he had a famous harem full of women. Oh, but he never slept with any of them. And the only time that any of them left or did anything was when he would go to sacrifice them to Kronos and the volcano to stop erupting. Volcanic activity cannot be stopped by sacrificing women, let me just say. But like,
unless you try though, Lexie.
Maybe it's just because I don't have, the stomach to try to murder someone to stop volcanic activity. Maybe just try a rain dance instead. But it's very odd. We've documented how orientalizing the language is about everyone in the Middle East. There's no one who's spared. But honestly, even though Greece is like supposed to be the foundation of modern Western culture in our frame of reference that we've leaned on for many centuries, it's just bizarre that I find his description of the Minoans to still be some weird orientalizing thing, even of Minoans. And I don't really understand that. I'm very confused. The whole Crete sequence, I remembered it being terrible. I remembered that it ended with essentially trying to describe Bronze Age collapse through the volcanic eruption of ancient Thera. But also the places were wrong because he wanted them on Crete and not Thera. And I find it funny because I was like, well, there are mountains on Crete, but the most famous volcanic activity in that era would have been Thera. So I'm like, I don't really understand whether or not on Santorini. Also because big volcano goes boom, destroys everything. That's Santorini. That's Thera, not Crete. So again, I'm very confused about geography, but I think more than anything, I'm just confused about why he would get the Greek stuff wrong if that is arguably out of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. Greece has the most evidence. The Greek frame of mind is the most popular, sadly. I just don't understand.
I don't know if he straight up didn't research or if he knew that it was Thera, but decided that for plot purposes it should be Crete. And if it's the latter, that's, for me, an interesting use of actual history to drive a plot in a fictional novel. The problem is there is so much other shit in this book that is just like bizarrely wrong, and bizarrely wrong in a way that doesn't actually add anything to the book, right? Like the whole Ishtar thing. There isn't anything there is to be gained from having her parents be Greek or having Greek names. That doesn't make sense in my brain, but it doesn't make sense within the world of the book either.
No, it's like a book with too much exposition is what it is. It's so much exposition. He's trying to throw all this like mythology background of his universe without providing a solid basis grounded in anything. Because, as you know, even though mythology I know is always bonkers in any culture, it still has a pattern. It has a rhyme. It has a rhythm. It has a chronology. I mean, I'm sorry. Hesiod had a whole theogony of the gods.
And if you're going to do this kind of synchronism, if you're going to take different mythologies from different places and mush them together, have the good grace to research how the ancients did it themselves, because this is not new to modern society, right? Ishtar was an Akkadian goddess, an Assyrian goddess. Inanna was a Sumerian goddess, and the ancients decided, actually, there are so many similarities between these two goddesses, they're probably the same. You just do a little research, for goodness sake.
I think, honestly, the thing that I could maybe go with your frame of mind for maybe he deliberately was like, if he's traveled anywhere in the world, you know, maybe let's deliberately make my Greek theater Crete instead of Thera. The thing that doesn't make sense, though, is that Crete is closer to Egypt, to the Delta. Now, if you truly are taking a journey up the Levant and you're kind of in, you know, that region, and then you have to go to Greece by going west, it's not geographically the first thing. I mean, actually, Rhodes would be first, and Rhodes had a shit ton of volcanic activity. Now, I get it, because you don't associate Rhodes with Minoan stuff. I get it. That's fine. Thera still is first, and especially if it's north, you know, depending on where you're leaving from the coast, that's where you would come. So again, even just looking at a map, look at a goddamn map of the world, and you will see Thera is first. It's over here. You would find that. I don't understand it. I'm sorry. It's just being a classics major, but also being now, you know, studying in modern Greece, becoming a scholar of modern Greece. It's really ridiculous to me that even modern Greeks recognize that like the most famous volcanic eruption is from Thera. They give you the dates, they give you who was involved. We have Akrotiri, a whole site preserved to us. Like a Minoan shit. They're just like there because it's destroyed. And it's the only Greek island that was like, if there was an eruption of volcanic activity that's so powerful, if it's truly that powerful, it would blow a hole in whatever piece of land. And that's why Thera is shaped like a moon, because it blew the entire center out of the island. So if that happened on Crete, we would have a hole in the middle of Crete. So Crete would not be Crete. Crete would be like Crete with like a donut or a moon in it. I'm sorry. So modern people know it. It's impossible. They tell you that. You can look at a map. That is, to me, the single most egregious thing, is that why are my Minoans on Crete? I don't understand this. There's a lot of egregious things that I could harp on. That to me is the most inexcusable one of them all. I'm sure there's a similar one for the Mesopotamia stuff, but to me, that is so egregious. I can't.
I think the thing that keeps coming back, and I think has been a bit of a recurring theme while we read these books, it's not just that they're full of weird inaccuracies. It's that the inaccuracies don't make sense. They just don't. It's laziness.
Explain to me why it's Crete, and then I'll be like, okay, I get it. It's not like the historical thing. Fine. But he doesn't explain.
No. And it's, if you're using the historical world, the ancient world, and you're cherry picking bits from it, then what you need to do, or I think what makes a more successful novel or series, is something that is coherent and has internal consistency. And it's worse in this book than the others, but as a series, it is not consistent. And the things that he takes out or that he chooses to represent are, by and large, things that show other non-Egyptian nations to be uncultured, uncivilized, barbaric, really. And I know, I've taken enough Egyptian history to know that the Egyptians, like many, many ancient cultures, had this superiority complex. Taita has it. I mean, it is like perfectly drawn. The Egyptians are the most civilized people on earth. So some of that is understandable. It's just, it's so glaring, especially when taken in combination with things like King Nimrod, like choosing the most attractive women from the temple for himself, and the Supreme Minos, like doing blood sacrifice or human sacrifice. And it's a whole kaleidoscope of really unfortunate choices. I think it's lazy writing because I don't think he did any research, and he's dealing mainly in stereotypes. And a stereotype can be useful. But when all of your characters are stereotypes, it just becomes repetitive and boring. And they're just, all of the bad guys are just so two-dimensional. All of them.
Yeah, I think, it always gets me thinking. And so one thing that I made sure to pull up for today, I did it immediately as soon as I finished reading, is because I listened to the audiobook version, as hopefully our audience will know by now, since I don't I don't have any of the physical versions. I'm able to see people's ratings and reviews of the novels. And the interesting thing it tells me, though, is that people are still giving it like generally positive reviews. Now, I'm not sure if it's because, they're not historians. And so they're like, okay, I don't know this enough to know. So, they're judging it based on the quality of the story and stuff. But I genuinely, like, as we're, shitting on it for all the inaccuracies, I'm trying to be charitable. I'm trying to think of, what is something positive I can say? What would make someone enjoy this or like this or truly be like, I like this book. And so I was like, I can't come up with anything. So I was looking at what people were saying. A lot of these reviews kind of reads like, people laymen who don't know. I mean, I just want to highlight, and I know we haven't done this on the show before, but you know what? It's warranted. We're in book 5. It's time, because I'm sure people are kind of like, if you don't like the series as it's progressing, why are you continuing to read the series? And I would say that's a valid question. So I want to highlight what a normal viewer has said. And this person just says, 5 stars. Wilbur Smith has done it again with the River God series and the Adventures of Taita. The story is not as long as other books, manages to compact a lot of adventure into a small amount of time. Wonderful job. In this book, we find him back with our beloved characters, the daughters of our beloved Queen Lostris, attempting to thwart an exciting Hyksos incursion on Egypt again. His adventures and ideas continue to keep me amazed and very entertained. You won't be disappointed. It's a nice addition to the series. I'm hoping Mr. Smith keeps the saga alive. Oh, and we finally find out why Taita seems to have such a long life and so many talents. You'll have to listen to find out. Enjoy. Let Wilbur Smith draw you in. What a marvelous storyteller. You don't want it to end, and it flows to a perfect ending. Great book.
I disagree with, I think, most things in that review. Aside from the historical issues I have with it, it's just not terribly compelling. It's the same plot from all of the other books. It's Taita going out and being a superhero and working with difficult women who were very, very attractive but very, very young, and being more intelligent than everyone else. And there are a couple of battles to try and keep people interested. It doesn't make sense as a book. The plot doesn't go anywhere. We don't get any kind of resolution with this Hyksos battle thing. I think I enjoyed the first part more, honestly, because I thought the military excursion to the fortress was interesting. It was clever. I liked him then sailing the ships back up the Nile and defeating the Hyksos that way. That was really interesting to me. Once they left, it was like a story that he didn't know how to end. They just kind of keep traveling, and then they get to Mesopotamia and some weird stuff happens. There was no reason for them to go around the Temple of Ishtar. There's really no reason for him to be Ishtar's secret lover. Who the hell knows? And then they keep traveling and get to Crete, and then weird stuff happens. It's all weird. It's just weird.
Wait, I'm sorry. I have to read you this one review because and this is what people are saying. So this might be a good judge of like, are we missing something? Are they missing something? Like I think it helps build a full picture, but I have to share that this is hilarious. So this guy gives it 4 out of 5 stars with the main title to draw you into the review, evocative. Now, I thought it was going to, but just listen to this. Smith is a master storyteller. I enjoyed reading River God so much that when I saw this new book about ancient Egypt desert god, I grabbed it. Our protagonist, Haita, is a former slave, eunuch, and fixer to Pharaoh. He has appeared in other Egypt books. From Thebes, young Pharaoh Tamosa rules a divided Egypt. Hyksos invade. He kind of describes the plot. It says, Smith tends to write characters as formally good or bad. At times, the narrative seems rushed, and toward the end of the book, key elements are covered by quick exposition to accelerate the plot. Overall, Smith blended intrigue, action, and suspense on a solid foundation of history to make a great historical novel.
And this is why I object to it being marketed as an historical novel, because people read it and they think it's fucking accurate.
Yeah, the next review, 5 stars, captivating and historically magical.
I mean, magical, yes, but
adventurous, beautiful, captivating. Yeah, so most of these reviews are saying it's captivating, beautiful, whatever. And here's the thing. If these people are writing these reviews on the basis of how the book is written, because he is a very evocative, good writer and sets a good
he's
scene,
really good at description. Absolutely.
then I agree. So I'm trying to ascertain from these reviews, like, are people reading it and just getting sucked into the world building he does through description? Because yes, I would agree with these reviews. It is beautiful. He does. It's thrilling to read and hear so much description. I just wish it weren't wrong. Or if it's wrong, tell me why, and I don't think that we are, I know that some people might sit here and be like, well, you're tearing it apart, especially because you are historians. But I don't think so, because even without a historian, I think my reaction would be beautifully written, but there's a lot of things that I don't know why. And I would like to know why this choice is being made. And I mean, I don't know. Do you think we're somehow super biased because we're historians, or,
I mean, I think there is definitely bias there, right? But even, again, without the historical lens, as a general reader, I think I would want, and I've read a hell of a lot of fantasy, I would want to know why he's suddenly semi-divine. And it's not mentioned again in the rest of the book. It's revealed as like this kind of major plot point. Like, that's it. And the only other role Inanna plays is to warn him about the children. And I feel like Lostress could have done that. Like, the spirit of Lostress, again, is throughout all the other books. She could have done that. She could have played that role instead of introducing this additional character. Like, does she come back in Pharaoh? I'm assuming she doesn't.
I don't remember because it's been like 5 years. All I know is, like, I don't want to sound too overly critical about a book that clearly it's got 4.6 out of 5 overall stars, and that's mixing together the hundreds of reviews. So, I don't take it lightly when I say that, people genuinely liked this book for a reason. I think knowing that that's how a lot of the public perceives it, I want to know why. I think, because I don't like being unfairly critical to things. And if people think I'm being too critical, then tell me, but tell me why. Give me a good reason that I can't just be like, yes, but, and then, say any of these, what I think are valid criticisms from you and I. So again, like the other books, I think I'm going to come out and say, it's beautifully written and it's captivating enough to hold my attention to finish it. It's not original, but the beautiful descriptive locations change. And, I'm not immune. I think it is fun to travel to all these different locations in the ancient world. I think it's fantastic that we actually don't stay in Egypt. I just think that you really need to redo the marketing. It shouldn't be a historical novel. If you want to say historical fantasy, that's pushing it, but fine. Okay, that's fantasy. But it shouldn't be historical, and it shouldn't just be the Egypt series if you don't intend to stay there. If your characters are Egyptian and then but there's nothing else Egypt. I don't really understand why it's an Egyptian series. And again, the chronology, the lore is off. Just tell me why. So the positive thing I will say is, again, beautifully written. I do very much enjoy the writing style. I just wish that I had more than sort of these valid, open criticisms and questions, because I'm like, I think it could be a much stronger book if you change a lot and just make it agree with the lore you've established, because it's hard for me to see this book as anything other than, oops, I made a mistake. People don't really understand the quest. I went way into the magics. Maybe I should. Or it was either that, or it was like, he clearly wanted a break from using the same characters, so he wanted to write something else with a completely new cast, but then decided, oh, I missed the old cast, and maybe my audience does too, and maybe everyone would be ready for, like, let's go back to these characters that we know and love from the first book. I don't really know. But there's no caveat of, like, if you like the first book, read this one next. Like, there's nothing. So, again, there's just a lot I feel disappointed more than anything. I'm not unhappy. I'm not pissed or anything. I'm just disappointed because I would have said some signposts, please give me an explanation of how to approach your series if that was the case.
I was disappointed by, I've already talked about how the ending felt very abrupt, but I was disappointed by the end of the Supreme Minos. Because in the beginning, or the first half of the book, Tahiti's all deeply skeptical about him being this 1,000-year-old being, or several hundred, or whatever. But then we see him, and his mother is described as being incredibly old. And he is this huge, kind of supernaturally powerful entity. But the question of whether he's actually human is never actually answered. His mother is killed by a falling rock when the volcano erupts, and then Taita shoots him with an arrow, and that's it. And the Minos himself says at one point during one of the ceremonies, or in the aftermath, I forget, why are you doing this, Kronos? You're my father. Like, my mother was your lover. I've worshipped you for hundreds of years. Like, either this is a deranged human, or this is actually another supernatural semi-divine being. And it's just glossed over in its entirety. Taita never even mentions, like, even a thought of, oh, I wonder if. They just leave. And it felt very unsatisfying because the whole Crete experience has all of
I wanted
these,
a bigger payoff.
Yeah, I did. It has all of these, like, Minotaur elements. That his mother is called Pasiphae. There's a giant auroch bull that gores someone while they're in the forest and nearly kills Taita. And then
why not have Taita go into the labyrinth and fight the Minotaur then? It's like...
I know, it's just left.
Or instead of being historically inaccurate, because there's no evidence of the Minoans doing human sacrifice like that, I'm like, what if you put the girls in the labyrinth? Say, we're going to feed them to the Minotaur. And so at least the one evidence of some kind of human sacrifice we have, which is feeding the 7 Athenians, to the Minotaur, then you hew to that sort of mythology that's established. Then you go, oh, okay, so there's an impetus. So now Taita must be brave and amazing. And now he must invent something cool to have him invent Ariadne's fucking string and just say it was him. Like, I don't care. Just take on something that's established that we know and say, okay, now he's going to invent the string idea and he's going to go and he's going to save them. And so the bull, the Minotaur himself, is the incarnation of Kronos, and the girls are in danger of being eaten. And now he's going to get there and he's going to slay that. And and as soon as he saves the girl, now, okay, fine, there's an eruption from the volcano, and now your rush to get them out is we need to find our way back out of the labyrinth quickly and escape. That would have made for, honestly, a better, more satisfying payoff. If you're going to use the Greek theater in any capacity, from mythology to just what is there. I mean, or even have him, okay, so say they got out in time with the thread that he invents. Oh, but then they're stranded, like, it's cut, you can't do anything. Have him invent the Daedalus's Icarus wings and they all fly off together. I don't know. We have so much mythology you can use.
And I would be frustrated with Taita inventing another amazing thing, but it would make a lot more sense and it would be a much more satisfying read.
Right? So like we can keep our basic main complaints about why does he have to invent all the things? He's clearly the Einstein times 20. But like, again, consistency is key. So if you're going to use the Greek theater, use Greek myths that we know. We know Daedalus, we know Icarus, we know these things, and if he'd invented the wings, when you have them abruptly end with like, being like, with Tahuti just being like, tell our brother that we died so he doesn't come looking for us. That's why if you have them go with the Icarus thing, you could go back to Pharaoh and be like, I invented these wings. I am so sorry. They flew too close to the sun. They fell and died. That's why they're dead.
That would be pretty cool.
Right? Like at least you're playing with that. So I don't understand. We could rewrite this book to have a more satisfying end, I think.
Yeah.
And we didn't even have to do a lot of research. We just
use what we know.
Just take myths that, yes, we use what we know. And it's not even like super historian research that only historians know. Most people would be familiar with the story of the Minotaur and Daedalus.
We should wrap up there. But for the love of God, please comment and tell us if we're just being ridiculously harsh on this man, or if these are valid criticisms, because I don't know if we're just going crazy or if this is actually as annoying as I think it is.
Or tell us if you agree with those reviews on Audible. Yes, I will say for our audience, if you also want to listen or look up the reviews on the audiobook version that I have been listening to, it is the Mike Grady narrated version on Audible. So that is where you can find all of the reviews. There are many, and there are many, many who love this book. Please tell me why. And if you agree with them, I want to know desperately.
Please.
Well, if people are tired of us ranting, we're also very happy. This is the last book in the series, so this is the last book we will rant about. Thank you for sticking with us, Absolutely. And I'm sure we will thank you, especially after that last book, because, God, this has been longer and more torturous than I thought. So
this is also the last episode for our Season 2 Egypt extravaganza. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with it. Like Lexie said, this book series in particular has been a bit torturous. I hope you've enjoyed us complaining. It's been quite cathartic, really. Cathartic, definitely the word for it. But next season, we will be looking at all things Rome, Empire, and City. So please join us then. I think we're going to start releasing in the fall. Don't have an actual release date yet, but if you keep your eye on social media, we'll announce that as soon as we can, and probably do a bonus episode or two over the summer. So we will be around, we will be back. And if you have suggestions for our Rome season, please leave a comment, drop us an email, and we will see what we can do. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful summer, and we will see you as soon as we can.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.